Hey, Mindy.
Hi, how are you, Chris?
I'm good. And you?
Good. Let me just see if I can uh, co-host you while we're thinking about you. All right. I performed my task.
I'm the co-host. The way we've done this in the past is you kick things off because it's your room, and then you hand it to me to introduce the speaker. And
Okay.
I've got some very brief prepared comments to share about Emily, at which point I'll turn it over to her. I think it works best if we let her share her screen so that she's managing the slides,
Right.
as opposed to us trying to manage the slides for her. So if you can just ensure that screen sharing is enabled.
Sure. I will definitely do that. Okay. It looks like it's already recording as well. So it looks like maybe Maria may have enabled recording.
Yeah, that's fine. What'll happen is either she or you will get the Zoom notice, and you'll just need to go in there and trim the front of it off.
Okay.
I had quite the mental block about that, and I finally got over it. So now I'm very efficient and effective at trimming things. So the first time I did it, I got rid of the stuff I wanted to keep, and I kept the stuff I wanted to get rid of. But I've come around. So I got an email this today from Emily asking about the audience, and I let her know that it's hard to tell, it's highly varied. We advertise it to all our grads in both programs, faculty, and then we advertise it at NMSU in something called Hotline, which is a daily newsletter
Right.
that goes to everyone and their cat and dog. So we could end up with 30 people or 300 people.
Yeah, I think we've got 32 registered right now.
Okay, so I think
That's a nice number.
I think everybody's getting a little tired of the semester, no spring break. So I'm not surprised to see the participation start to dwindle a little bit, but 32 is a good crowd if people will attend.
Absolutely. I think 32 is a nice number actually. So we'll take it. We'll take it.
Yep. I'm expecting Emily to pop in any moment. So I'll just hang out, and I'm going to mute my audio and video and just await notice that she's in the room, and then I'll jump in and say hi to her.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you very much, Mindy.
Thank
And you
you.
go by Mindy, right? Not Melinda?
I do. I go by both. So you absolutely.
Okay. Thanks, Mindy.
Okay, see you soon. Hi, Emily.
Hi, Melinda. How are you?
Good to see you. I'm good.
My background's doing something weird. I'm gonna have to turn it off.
Are you you pronouncing your last name Elias?
That's
Elias.
fine. Yeah.
It's Emile Elias, right?
It's
Elias.
Elias, but that's really hard for people, especially in the Southwest. So either is fine.
Elias. I can handle it. I can handle it.
Okay. All right.
Hey, Emily, I enabled screen sharing, but do you want to, I assume you're going to be using some sort of PowerPoint presentation. Is that correct?
I am. Yes. Let me give it a go.
Yeah, let's just do a quick,
Can you see it?
perfect.
Looks good. Hi,
Great.
All
Emily.
right. All right. Hi.
Perfect. Awesome.
I miss our Friday morning get-togethers.
I know. I do too. I think I'm gonna stop my background because I'm sort of fading into the.
Is that a particular
Mountain.
landscape that we should know?
This is actually no. It's the mountains outside of Durango, Colorado. So
Oh, the
nothing
Flatirons?
famous. So near Durango, I think Flatirons
You
are
said, oh,
Boulder.
so you said Durango. I was thinking Boulder. Okay. So the San Juans,
The
the,
San Juans. Yes. Yeah. Maybe this one will work a little better. Okay.
there we go. I love the, I'm jealous. Everyone else has these cool green screens. I just have my lame. I've got, do you see a picture of Frida? I recently went to the Albuquerque Museum has Frida and Rivera. So as a couple kind of featured at the Albuquerque Museum. So I recently went to their exhibit. It's really lovely.
Oh yeah, I have to kind of zoom. I can see just barely. I bet it was great. I'd like to go check it out.
She's my strong, independent woman figure for my inspirational
Yeah.
vision board.
Yeah, thanks.
Wrestled with the background doing weird things to my head. So I've opted for just the personal touch of my home office. So if I move out of the way, you can see some very interesting photographs on the wall.
Yeah.
My wife is a retired racehorse jockey, so
Oh.
this is the racehorse wall. And then we have the Italy wall in the hallway, and then we have a Native American wall and an Australia wall. So we're not curators, but that's what we decided to do. So,
Interesting.
yep.
Hi, Emily. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Dan Duga. I'm in the geography department at MSU, one of Chris's colleagues. And I actually teach the climatology class for our department. So I'm very interested in what you have to say today.
Oh, great. Yeah, nice to meet you. It's going to be a little bit of climatology and a lot of other things too, but
It should.
I hope to stop 3 times and have discussion. So hopefully
Great.
during those times we can take a deeper dive into what you're interested in.
Excellent. Thanks for joining us, Dan. And Emily, I'd like to extend Iftikhar's regrets. He is with sick child at the doctor's office today. So he was unable to join us, but his exam date is set 2 weeks from today. And soon he will be Dr. Islam. And I really
That's
appreciate
exciting.
all your support. Just amazing.
Yeah. Oh, I'm glad. I was very happy to work with him. And
Cool. Okay,
heard it.
I'll turn my audio off to prevent the dog from joining us.
I'm going to step away for just a second and I'll be right back.
Hi, Emily.
Hi, Sarah. Good to see
How
you.
are you? Good to
I'm
see you
good.
too.
I didn't know you'd be here. I'm happy to see you.
Thanks for
I'm
coming.
sorry.
It's great to
Yeah.
have you present.
Happy to be here. I had to step downstairs. My children are playing a video game and screaming really loud. So when
Well,
Chris
you
mentioned
know.
his dog, I thought I'd just go try to stop that. So hopefully we'll be good for an hour. I think we'll be all right.
Well, we find that we have a lot of FaceTime with central administration, and one of our very senior level VPs is a very, very lively dog. So as she attempts to project this incredible sense of authority and responsibility and control, the dog is not having any of it at all.
Glad to see you join us, Sarah. Welcome.
Good to see you too. It's been a long time.
Absolutely too long.
Yeah.
Hey, Laurel. It's been 24 hours, maybe a little
Right.
less. Since I've
Yeah. Yes.
and Chris just informed me we usually wait a couple of minutes before we actually get started. I am pinch hitting for Maria Lane today, so for the UNM Geography Department. So we'll just wait one more minute before we get started. See who else might join. And so those of you who are students, if now is a good time to go ahead and share your screen, students, if you don't mind, as we get started here, as we welcome our guest. Thank you, Daniel. Hi. There you are, everyone. Excellent. So my name is Melinda Morgan. I am Associate Professor and Associate Chair of Geography and Environmental Studies here at the University of New Mexico. And I am standing in today for Maria Lane, Professor and the colloquium co-coordinator with Chris Brown at New Mexico State of our joint series, colloquium series. My only duty today really is to hand the Zoom baton over to Chris to introduce our speaker and to welcome everyone to the space. I'm really looking forward to this talk today. So again, welcome everyone. Really looking forward to the talk. I know that our speaker is interested in having discussion in the middle of her talk today and employing the chat today. So, so please be ready for an engaged discussion. And I will now turn it over to Chris. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mindy, and Emily, especially thanks to you for joining us today. We're all really, really excited about our joint doc program. And this speaker series has been a wonderful way for us to connect with students from both campuses and bring in some really, really interesting people like yourself. I've got a couple prepared comments, so I'm not reading my email if I look a little distracted. Thanks for you all for coming. It's a real pleasure to introduce Dr. Emile Elias to the group today. I've been very fortunate to have worked with her for the last 2 or 3 years on a funded research project that looked at surface water balances in the Upper Rio Grande Basin. And during this time, she's been extremely generous in supporting 2 of our graduate students. This support has led to the successful completion of graduate research projects. For those of you that joined us early, we're expecting a PhD defense to happen 2 weeks from today. And I'm just super appreciative to Emily for doing that. She's the director of the USDA Southwest Climate Hub. It's an organization that looks at 5 states in the Southwest For the last couple of decades, she's looked at the interface of water scarcity, water quality, ag production, and natural resources. The goal of this is trying to support resilient landscapes and communities. And this concept of resilience is really key to her work. She leads a Southwest Climate Hub team that is engaged in research and science synthesis efforts. They do some tool development to support decision-making, and she does some stakeholder outreach. In her talk today, she will share with us a discussion entitled Challenges and Opportunities, Responding to the Impacts of Climate Change in the Southwestern U.S. Emily, as a point of information, EBID released their forecast for this year. It's 4 acre inches. So your talk could not come at a more timely time. With that, before I make a fool of myself anymore, I'll stand back and turn it over to Dr. Elias. Thank you for joining us today, Emily.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks everyone. It's nice to see some familiar faces. Thank you for turning your cameras on. I know everybody's at home in their pajamas, so I appreciate you being here, turning your cameras on. And as Chris mentioned, and Melinda mentioned, I would like this to be interactive. So, I mean, it's Friday afternoon, we've had a long week, it's been a long year, and so I'll present information, and then at 3 times throughout the presentation, I'm going to stop. And I have a few questions for you. I have a few activities we're going to do using the chat box. And so I really do want, you probably have some questions. You probably have some questions about climate change, maybe about the administration, about what it's like to be a federal scientist doing climate change work. You might have questions more about the natural system or socio-ecological systems. So let's talk about it. That's what I hope we can do throughout this presentation. I will go ahead and share my screen now. And I would like to invite you, however, at any time while I'm talking, drop your questions in the chat box. I know you can have a question and then we can move on to something else and you can lose that question. So just use the chat throughout the presentation. Drop your question in the chat box. When we stop, we'll talk, and then we'll just keep going back and forth in that way. So let me share my screen here. A little bit of a traditional presentation just as an introduction. So as everyone mentioned, I'm Emile Elias. I'm the director of the USDA Southwest Climate Hub. And this is a group that I'll tell you about just at the beginning to give you a little bit of context. I am a research hydrologist by training, looking at land use and climate change challenges. And water quality impacts and that sort of thing. So the climate hubs, just as a little bit of background, were USDA's response to President Obama's climate action plan. So in actually 2013, USDA came up with 10 hubs across the nation. They were rolled out or announced in 2014. 5 of these hubs are located at USDA Agricultural Research Service stations, and 5 of them are at Forest Service research stations. So we're across the USDA, across the United States. Our hub covers New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, Nevada, Hawaii, and the US affiliated islands west of Hawaii. So a few very different climatological regions. And we have been at this since 2014, and I've been with the hub since 2014. So it's been really exciting and interesting to see it evolve as a program from this tiny program of 3 people trying to work with farmers and ranchers and foresters across this huge area to a little bit bigger program and a little bit deeper understanding of what some of our challenges are. So we really work to support agricultural and natural resource managers. And we do this often through working through advisors. So we work with Forest Service, Natural Resource, NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service, farm advisors, so that we really work to educate and provide information for people that then provide information. That seems to be the most effective way for us to do what we need to do. We operate in 3 functional areas. So we're all research scientists, most of us on the team. So we do a lot of science synthesis and assessment work. So there are many of you on this call today that do a lot of research, do a lot of work, and we try to pull that information together in vulnerability assessments and other synthesis products. We also do a lot of tool development, and more recently, we've found that there are many, many decision support tools out there. So we curate those tools and create a way for people to find those tools based on the questions that they have. So an example would be livestock tools. We recently did an investigation of what tools are available for livestock producers and found that there were more than 600. And so of those, then we created a tool shed or a way for people to reach the information that they need. So is it about environmental footprint? Is it about finance? You know, how can you find the information you need to answer the questions you have to be more resilient? And then the third functional area is really bringing together scientists with decision makers or stakeholders and convening around knowledge gaps and questions that we may have. And so today, I'm going to talk about some examples of challenges by region in the country and then solutions that people have come up with. So that's going to be my focus of the conversation today, at least initially. And then we'll have a little bit of interaction, and then we'll talk a bit about climate vulnerability and what can we do to assess climate vulnerability and then respond to climate vulnerability. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen because this is the time when I have some questions for you to start. So we're going to use the chat box. And I'm going to ask a question and I'll type that question into the chat box. And then I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to think about your answer and to type it in, but don't hit enter. We're going to hit enter at the same time so that we can get a variety of responses. So the first question is really about you, about who you are, about what you're doing. So I'm curious about what what are you researching? What are you doing? And if you're not researching, what topics are most interesting to you right now? And that could be a research topic, but it also could be equity, or it could be in anything. What's most interesting to you right now? What is grabbing your interest? So I'll type these questions in here for you. Okay, go ahead and take a few minutes. Type your answers. I'm watching, okay, I was watching Sarah, watching everybody to see if you're ready. And I think everybody's sort of looking up and ready. So go ahead and hit enter. We'll see what we have. Excellent, thank you so much. Thanks for all of these great responses. So I'm gonna start at the top. Really curious about what's going on with drought. Water quality in developing countries, really important topic. Interested in how systems respond to climate change. Yes. Just interested in renewable energy, right? Mitigation and net zero. That's a big topic, especially now with changes in the administration. Okay, sensitivity of dryland ecosystem structure and function to climate change. We just did a really awesome podcast on that topic. It's really interesting. Decolonizing our food system. Excellent. Small scale farming. Okay, I don't talk too much about food, a little bit today. Climate change adaptation through sharing urban space with wildlife. Excellent topic. How to automate migratory bird counts to make population census simpler for wildlife managers. That has a really important practical application. for those folks that have to do or who are doing that work. Broad-based environment and renewable energy topic, second one. So there's a little bit of a theme on renewable energy coming out. Disasters, really interesting. And I took the slide out, but definitely increasing in frequency across the board. Land use change within Doñana. Okay, historical change. Yeah, that's really great. U.S.-Mexico water resource management, because that could take you quite a long time. There's a lot there. Environmental narratives, representations of place and environmental change. Excellent. Oh, national parks and the pandemic. Yeah. I'd be curious what you find there, because I have a feeling more people are going to the parks now. Yeah, cool. Politics, knowledge production, and climate justice. Yeah, that seems to be a really important theme that's getting a little more traction now. Equitable urban community forestry initiatives. Yeah, Sarah, that makes me think of you too. Recharge and transboundary aquifers. Regime change as we face results of climate change and how we can adjust our legal institutional frameworks. Really important. So broadening beyond our natural resources and environmental to broader systems. Wow, these are really great. Thank you so much. Excellent. Using remote sensing data to distinguish between grass and shrub coverage in rangelands. It's a really important piece of work right now. It's happening. There are at least 5 groups I know that are working on that. So let me know if you want to be hooked up with them. All right, bird migrations. Okay, thank you. Thanks for sharing that. So that's a huge breadth and depth of information that you're thinking about, that you're coming to this room with today. So it'll be really interesting to see where we go with this. This is going to be a shorter answer. One more question for you, and then we'll move on to the next. This is a one-word answer or a phrase. What is the first word that comes to mind? Trying to type this here. What is the first word that comes to mind when you think of climate change? I'll give you a few seconds to think about that and type in your answer. Okay. All right. Okay, let's go. So we're definitely seeing some themes coming up here. So this will be quick. Adaptation, inequity, drought, yikes, have to do something about it. The uncertainty showed up a couple times, scarcity, worry, extremes, drought, destruction, a lot of adaptation and uncertainty and drought and drying. Okay, and sustainability, thank you. And so maybe a little bit of resilience in there as well. Okay, awesome. I'm gonna skip my next one so that we can get through a bit more. And I'm gonna show you some examples of challenges from around the country and solutions that people came up with. So I'll share my screen again. Thank you. It's very interesting to me that everyone's themes of drought, uncertainty, variability, adaptation are showing up. Sharing my screen here. So this is an example from the Northern Forests, and it's really around innovations and community engagement. And the challenge for this group was how to effectively reach really busy people in far-flung areas to help them understand and work through adaptation. And so the Northern Forest Climate Hub came up with an online adaptation planning process. And this process has been employed, especially in forests across the Northeast, many, many times with many different groups of people. And so they use information from the National Climate Assessment and other assessments. And this has been very helpful during COVID because they lead groups of people through 7-week-long courses. And the participants create their own adaptation plans. And it's led to some very real adaptation efforts on the ground, as opposed to assessments and things that need to be done, but don't actually make it into practice and implementation. And so that is one example that I think I'm pretty proud of, and is some way that we're trying to go in the Southwest in the future. We just finished one in Hawaii, and it was really excellent. Innovations and community engagement again. So we're getting a lot of information about climate change, but a lot of landowners and managers are unsure how climate change might actually manifest at scales relevant to decisions they have to make. So this is out of the Midwest Climate Hub. And what they did was use that adaptation process, but change it to be used for agricultural systems. And so this is just an example of a solution that's been used with folks dealing with agriculture across the country. So this is an interesting thing that's happening. In the northeastern part of the country, they're already seeing an increase in precipitation amounts and precipitation intensity. So it's really becoming a challenge. At the same time, that increase is not happening in the summer. It's happening in the shoulder seasons. So in the summer, they're getting drying and they're needing to learn about irrigation. So the challenge is that they're having these drier summer soils where they're not used to having drier summer soils. And so there was a project that the Northeast Hub did to help growers diversify vegetable farming operations. And they were actually both over and under irrigating. They found this out. And so they employed more soil moisture monitoring and then tailored the scale and the diversity of their irrigation systems to help protect water quality. So it turned out to be a really good project because they were learning from others. It was a peer-to-peer project. So that was working. Healthy soils, I think a lot of people have heard about healthy soils, but the challenge is improving soil health for broad sustainability and resilience. And so there was a large effort involving a lot of people at the bottom right of this slide to engage agricultural producers around healthy soil practices. And you can see those practices listed or mentioned here. But they basically are pretty simple practices, really: minimizing disturbance, maximizing cover, maximizing biodiversity. So it wasn't an innovation in the science, it was an innovation in sharing that science with people that are making decisions. Okay, so in the Southeast, a big challenge or a big problem is land salinization that's been linked with climate change. And so the Southeast Climate Hub, along with the NRCS, came up with this way to identify the stage and cause of coastal salinization. So it could be sea level rise, but it also could be storm surge or groundwater pumping. So really trying to identify what's happening, because all climate adaptation is local. One field is very different from another. And then define some mitigation measures and propose the adaptation measures, and then estimate the next stage of salinization. So trying to do something again on a local basis. And you'll see a theme here because many of these practices are fairly local. So this is a project out of our hub, and we really wanted to understand the spatial and temporal trends in weather and climate related risks to agricultural production. So we used cause of loss data from the Risk Management Agency to see how much we're paying for crop loss across the country for different causes. So you can see drought is this yellow swath in the middle of the country. There's also excess moisture and precipitation, hail, heat, freeze. So there are a lot of different climate related causes of loss across the country. And so our solution is really to analyze and visualize these indemnity payments by location and crop and cause of loss to identify some vulnerabilities. So for example, you can dive down into a specific county and see that that loss is typically freeze, and it's for certain crops at certain times. And so then you can identify that those crops really are vulnerable and might need to do something different for those crops, be it some type of adaptation or maybe a switch in crops. So that's something out of our hub. This is from the Caribbean hub. And so, of course, hurricanes Maria and Irma happened not that long ago. And the hub then was faced with responding to and rebuilding after both extreme storms and hurricanes. And so their solution to reduce these vulnerabilities was learning about and applying lessons from hurricanes via different geospatial analyses and surveys. And so this next slide shows you the results from one survey that they did of agricultural land advisors. And what they found was power outages, communication issues, closed roads, and fallen trees were really some of the most devastating impacts on agricultural lands. And you might not think fallen trees would be a big impact on ag lands, but that's what they found. And so they're using that information to try to prepare for some future responses. For example, ways to cope with the power outages, having generators, that sort of thing. Ways to have better equipped communication networks, that sort of thing. So they use this information to try to build a little bit more resilience in the system. So this is from the Southwest. This picture is from a group of ranchers on the Colorado Plateau in 2018, when we were having a pretty devastating drought at that time. And the picture in the middle, or the image in the middle, is our current conditions. And you can see that over most of the Southwest, we are in the highest classification of drought. This has persisted for about a year. So these are not new conditions. We have been in exceptional drought across the Southwest for about a year, and it looks like it will continue at least through the end of May. And so in response to that, our hub put together the Drought Learning Network, which is to support peer-to-peer knowledge exchange. We realized in that 2018 drought that there were lessons learned that were not being shared across geographies and were not being shared from one drought to the next. And so we created the Drought Learning Network, where resource managers are working with climate service providers this year on these 6 topics. If you're interested in any of these, even if you just want to come and listen, let me know. So there's a group working with tribal members. There's a group working to share management practices. So what worked in one place, can we share that in another place? There's a group working specifically on drought impact reporting to help the drought monitor be better across spatial scales and across time. So working to get folks in the field to report back up to the drought monitor. Working on drought in agriculture, and then P2P, everyone wants to know, that's projections to people. So what climate information do people really need to make decisions? What's the relevant time scale and spatial scale? So that's what we're working on with that. This is from the Northern Plains Climate Hub, and the challenge is that ranchers need to make herd management decisions with very limited information. And so we did our best working with Colorado State University and others to come up with GrassCast. And this is a forecast of grassland production for the upcoming grazing season. So it generally starts in May, and it's updated every 2 weeks. And it uses historic weather plus observed weather information throughout the season, so that by the end of the season, you have a pretty good estimate of what the production is in a particular location. And that does help people to make decisions. We used to have just one map. We made it 3 because we realized that at any point in time, it's good to provide a what if scenario if precipitation ends up being lower than we think it'll be, or if it ends up being higher than we think it'll be. So that's GrassCast. And I'm going to skip through this. It does describe how GrassCast, the modeling piece of it, but I think I'm going to skip through that because it's a little bit heady, a lot of detail in there. Wildfire is another issue we really deal with a lot in the Southwest. One of the tools that we developed was a toolkit specifically for water managers, and it's called After Fire. It's to try to help folks cope with and find funding for responding to the water quality impacts that come along after wildfires. There's also, of course, reforestation, which is an important piece of this. And so the California Hub came up with a reforestation toolkit or a decision support system around reforestation in California as an example. And I would love to have one of those here. Another good example, I think, is around some controlled burns. And so the Southern Plains Climate Hub worked on teaching people how to do prescribed burns. And so there are a lot of field days and a lot of efforts to work specifically with people to do this so there aren't as many catastrophic wildfires. And then this is out of the Midwest Hub. So the challenge is really early spring and what that can do to vegetation. And so the Midwest Climate Hub came up with some timely reports of current and projected conditions to help folks make some decisions. So you can see this is an example at the bottom of the National Phenology Network and showing that spring is a bit early or was a bit early this year and what that could mean, especially when plants start to bud and then you have another freeze, what that's going to do to a system. And so now I'm going to stop sharing again, and we're going to go through some questions. And I'm going to let you ask questions if you have any. Any questions about anything I presented or, you know, politics, climate change? Have any questions at this point? Oh, okay, Sarah, I see you put a question in here. At what point do we quantify permanent aridification or desertification that is no longer drought? That is such a great question. We've seen periods, long periods of drought in the very long historic record. If you go back to like some of the work that Connie Woodhouse did and looking at tree rings, even back to the 1500s, you can see long periods of drought. So is this a Pacific decadal oscillation event and we're going to come out of it? Or is this going to be going forward like this? I think it'll be the latter. And how we respond to that is a big challenge. I think what we'll be seeing is some shifts in the precipitation. And if I get to it in this presentation, that's the next part of my presentation. But I think we're going to be seeing shifts in season that will be leading to more permanent aridification or conditions that we might find in other parts of the world. And so then we might be thinking about climate analogs and what do people do in those other parts of the world and what can we learn from them? Okay, how receptive have producers been to the various tools? That's a really good question. In the workshops I've had with producers, I would say there is a high level of skepticism about NDVI-based tools. And that's because some of the, so NDVI is probably most of you know this because we're geographers, but it's a greenness measure that's satellite-based. And that was used for some insurance programs in the past and didn't always work consistently well. And so it depends on the tool, but that's a really good question. I think if producers are involved in creating the tool and it's answering a question that they have, there's a lot more openness to using the tool. They do like tools to find tools. That seems to be what people really want is, I have a question, how do I find the answer to that question with this huge amount of stuff? How to help me get to something that's scientifically sound and valid. Okay, so how does grasscast relate to native species survival during drought, such as milkweed, with linkages to monarch population abundance tracking? That's a really good question. Grasscast is based on the descent model, and so it doesn't go down to species level information. So it wouldn't link specifically with a species. It's much more of a broad forage production estimate or predictor for the year. And so it's a bit of a challenge because, you know, not all forage is created equal. So if you're a manager, just because there will be forage there doesn't mean that it's the kind of forage that you would like. So that's a great question. And with the current carbon dioxide levels or more, how relevant are the historic models and duration of drought? So that's a great question. I think that the modeling that is done for the National Climate Assessment is updated with a pretty regular frequency. And so when that is done and the assumptions are changed, they do that, you know, the groups that do that modeling, and as many groups across the world, they do update those assumptions. So I think that that is pretty good. I see what you're saying though about historic models and kind of looking into the past, and we're talking about non-stationarity here. And so can we rely on the past when we're looking towards the future? That's a huge area of research, and there's a lot of uncertainty. Did you want to verbalize a question? Because it looks like you're almost, no, okay, are you sure? Okay. And then have you or your organization done an analysis on the cost of drought? Yes, we have. We funded analysis of the cost of the 2018 drought in New Mexico, and that work was done with Frank Ward at NMSU. Some of you probably know Frank, and he's just finishing that up. At the same time, our partners funded a similar analysis in Utah, Arizona, and Colorado. So we're just trying to figure out how to bring those different analyses together, maybe in a special issue of a journal, because you know things were looked at in different ways, which I think that's pretty good. But the cost of drought that we were looking at was focused on just the 2018 drought in agriculture for New Mexico. So that's a big challenge in terms of that national disaster map that is put out by NOAA. They have a really hard time valuing the cost of drought. It's a big challenge at the moment. They look at crop loss payments, but that really doesn't capture everything that needs to be captured. Okay. No, so now I have a few questions. And I think you've shared some of this. My question, I'm just going to ask one because the questions took longer than I thought, and that is okay. My question is, what do you think we need to consider when building a more climate resilient society?
Could you repeat that one more time?
And I'm going to type it in for you too. What do you think we need to consider when building a more climate resilient society? I'm spelled resilient, but you know what I mean. Okay, these are great. Sorry, I was just reading and not talking, and I think you all are as well. Okay, excellent. There are some things coming out here. So there's how much we pay for water, uncertainty, that there's more than just a human world. Equity is definitely a thing that's coming out here. How to fundamentally change our actions and assumptions. ethics and power and justice and all people, or everyone, that's not just all people. Yeah, existing social, economic, and political inequities. So there's a huge equity component to this that you might not have thought would come out in this conversation. Transfer of knowledge and technology should not be unidirectional. I love that. That's absolutely true. So that knowledge co-production of working with people that are making decisions to make sure that we're working together as a society or community when we're trying to find answers to our biggest questions. More trees, absolutely. We need to adjust our agricultural system. Co-production of knowledge, that's coming through again. So thank you. Those are great responses. I think that's exactly where we need to go. Any other thoughts or things anyone wants to discuss before I start into a little more presentation? Just got an awesome idea. Why not find another planet? And then we could put all the industries there. Okay. Hey, it could happen. I mean, I don't know, SpaceX, I'm not sure. Anything else? Any other discussion questions? And feel free to unmute yourself if it's easier to verbalize a question.
I'm sure that that last comment was said a little bit tongue in cheek, but I think it kind of can underscore some of the ideas of. I mean, does that really now we've just made another planet in how that solves some of the we've brought.
So Brad, you cut out for me a little bit. I'm sorry. I didn't hear your full comment.
Oh, no worries. It's my internet, I'm sure. Yeah, I was just saying, I know that last comment about like another planet was said tongue in cheek, but I think that underscores kind of how we think of the world as separate, right? Well, I cut out again.
Yeah, but you can put it in the chat box, and I would like to hear what you have to say if you want to put it in the chat. All right. And Carol, let's try to keep our planet in suitable shape. I like that. Okay. Capitalism versus the environment. Absolutely. Okay. I waited the 16 seconds that you're supposed to wait to see if you can get people, what if there are any extra ideas, and I think we're good. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again and talk about vulnerability and what we think about in terms of vulnerability from a scientific context. And we do only have about 18 minutes left, so I'll go through some presentations, but also try to leave some time for other questions or discussion. So feel free to use the chat box. And so I imagine a lot of you have seen this before. If you have seen this framework before, just put yes in the chat box because I'm curious about that. This is a typical vulnerability framework from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and it includes exposure of a system and sensitivity of a system to then inform impact. But the impact isn't the entire story of vulnerability because each system has its own adaptive capacity, and then that can change whether or not there's an impact. Okay, so I'm looking and I'm seeing a few yeses coming in here. Yes. Okay, so you've seen that. We're going to move on through. So one of the first things that the Climate Hubs did was to produce a vulnerability assessment. And we did, of course, one for the Southwestern United States, and that then became a journal article in the journal Climatic Change. And so, or it's actually a series of 7 journal articles for the Southwest. So if you're curious about our Southwestern vulnerability, there's a lot of good research there. But in general, what you mentioned in the chat box is right on, right? Water scarcity is one of our main challenges, and it has been. It has always been. So it's one of the hottest and driest regions of the U.S. We, of course, have the Great Basin and Sonoran and Mojave and Chihuahuan deserts. And as you can see, if you look at this map, agriculture is really located along those water sources, generally along the Pecos, along the Rio Grande, along some of the rivers in southern Arizona. There's also the CAP project, the Central Arizona project, that brings water to that area as well. So we've built our agriculture where there's water as much as we can, or we've moved water to the agriculture. Snowpack, of course, many of you know, is sort of the natural reservoir storage for our water systems. And this is my area of research. A lot of the water that we have comes from the Rockies and the Sierra Nevada mountains. Groundwater is also really important or essential in the region. And you can see, especially in the Ogallala area, that a lot of the crops are reliant almost entirely on groundwater for their cultivation. These are some changes that we've observed so far, and this is from the last National Climate Assessment. So it's always good to say the period. So we're comparing 1901 to 1960 compared to 1986 to 2016, and you can see general increase in temperature, and those are projected to increase going into the future. There are a lot of different ways to show this, but we're pretty secure in our knowledge that that has happened and will happen going into the future. That, of course, drives a lot of different things, including earlier spring, extreme heat, reduced snowpack water content, earlier snow melt, less winter precipitation falling in snow. So there are a lot of changes ecologically and management-wise that go along with that, and of course, drought and wildfire. Those temperature increases can, of course, drive a longer growing season, which would mean that if you have the water, you could cultivate a couple crops in a year. They also could drive reduced chilling hours, and stone fruit require chilling hours to be able to produce fruit. And so you can see this image on the right where that failed because of reduced chilling hours. An amplification of hydrological drought, and then reduced soil moisture as a few of the many things that temperature increase drives. Precipitation is a little bit more challenging, but what we have seen across the Southwest, comparing these two time periods, is that generally there has been a decline in precipitation over the Southwest. This is actually from the third National Climate Assessment. So there has been a decline, but you can see some decadal shifts as well if you just look at the information by decade. Future precipitation is, the projections are really highly variable for the Southwest. There's an idea that drier areas are expected to become drier. Declining winter snowpack, and that of course relates to the temperature that I mentioned. And patterns are also, of course, dependent on the winter storm track and the El Nino Southern Oscillation. There's an idea that there will be an expansion of the Southern Tropical Dry Zone, increased probability of mega droughts. And as Sarah sort of alluded to, we've been in a 25-year drought already. And then a greater proportion of precipitation falling in those extreme events. So increase in precipitation intensity. Some recent research has shown that we think that the North American monsoon may shift to having less precipitation in June and July and more in September and October. So for those of you that investigate plants or other animals, it's interesting to think about what that would mean for your system of study or for what you're interested in. So this is from the most recent National Climate Assessment, and I just wanted to highlight some of the main findings. I don't want to take too long though. So basically what this is saying is that water has declined. We've already seen it decline during drought, and that we're really trying to balance declining supplies with our greater demands as we face climate change. As some people mentioned, of course, ecosystems and ecosystem services and the folks that worked on this chapter were especially knowledgeable about forest systems. And so they're talking about different actions to help reduce future vulnerabilities of ecosystems and humans. And this is work that was done by John Aboxaglou and Park Williams in 2016. And I think it's particularly telling around wildfires. And so you can see they modeled historically what wildfires would be as far as area burned, cumulative forest area burned without climate change, and then the increase in that area burned with climate change. So it's a pretty important figure. There was a special chapter related to Indigenous peoples and talking about challenges and some of the work that Indigenous people are doing to help respond to climate change. And one of those efforts is bringing back cultural burning. This is the Yurok Reservation or the Yurok tribe in California, and talking about how they are using low to medium intensity fires to enhance the production of a lot of different important cultural resources, plant-based medicines, basket materials, native fruits, forages for wildlife, and also an ancillary benefit of reducing catastrophic wildfire risk. And then food production, I think it's important to show this shift in agricultural zones or growing zones and how that shifts from the past to the future. This is using the highest scenario, but really these are the plant hardiness zones. And it looks like in a lot of places in the Southwest, we're going to be shifting our plant hardiness zones. I don't like to go through all of those impacts without showing some great things people are doing. So I wanted to highlight a few of these. We talked about cultural fire restoration. There's a lot of efforts to do some rooftop solar, so helping with mitigation via rooftop solar. There are efforts around extreme heat and health, water conservation, wildfire fuel reduction. There's a lot of things that people are doing and interesting groups that are emerging. One example is the Malpai Borderlands group, and that's a group of ecologists and ranchers that are getting together to try to respond collectively to some of the challenges that they're seeing in Southern Arizona. So there's a lot we can do when people get together that you might not expect would get together. This, I wanted to highlight that there's certainly some climate adaptation is local, and it's not always only about climate. And I think we got to that in some of the responses that you gave today around capitalism, equity, social systems, right? Those were the things that you were responding and what you're thinking about. And that's exactly what's happening here. So we're looking at climate change and temperature and precipitation and in very different ways that manifests on our lands and soils and water supplies. But there are many non-climate factors that impact our vulnerabilities. And so I just wanted to call that out, that there are some institutional and policy and market forces that can impact crop production and livelihoods and profits, and that it's a very complex social system. And the more we can work with social science along with our natural science to move forward in our knowledge and response, the better we'll be. And the more we really respect all of the different types of sciences and that they have something important to bring to the table in response to climate and climate change. So I have a few examples, and these are just small local level examples. This is an example of pecan farmers in Doñana County and just what they're going through, right? How they're responding. So these are really small farms usually. They usually have multiple sources of income. They're highly dependent on access to surface water and groundwater. That makes soil salinity a big issue, partially because they flood irrigate. But the biggest cause of loss that they experience in terms of that risk management agency data is wind and hail. The smallest farms depend on larger producers to borrow equipment. So there's this interesting system, the social system that's there that wouldn't work without the larger producers in the system. And mostly the commercial scale farms are the ones that take out insurance. So those small farms, if they have a loss, they just have a loss and they won't get paid for that loss. And so there's an interesting inequity in that system too, of like the big farmers will take out the insurance. And if there is some type of lack of chilling hours, for example, they will get paid, whereas those small farmers might not. And there are a lot of other factors that can introduce risk into the system, be it water rights, what's going on with Mexico and water, trade policy. So I wanted to share that example. And then I think I'll skip the next example and leave a few minutes for questions. And these are the few questions I think I want to ask, but I love this picture at the end of this presentation. This is from a field day we had down at the Jornada Experimental Range. And this was the bus taking all of the scientists out to the range. And there was a major storm, and I really thought, it's over. I thought, okay, everybody turn around. This is the end of our field day. We're not going to have it. Within about half an hour, they had figured it out, gotten the bus out. We had the field day. Everything was fine. The sky cleared. And so I like this picture because from our current vantage point, it can look really bad. And things can change. Like, people got out there, they knew what to do, they worked on things can change. And so when we're thinking about climate change, climate adaptation, when we talk just about the science and not the people involved, it gets very defeating. And so I just wanted to reiterate that while it can look very bad from a scientific perspective, there's a lot that we can do and to keep trying. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I see there are 4 messages or a few more down here. Okay. So let's see where to start with these questions. Okay, excellent. So Chris says something that Malpai group does great work at the radical middle. Nice. Do you see an increase in farm size over time among these farmers? That is a really good question. I'll have to investigate that. I don't know. I know that when these farms started, at least one of them was started as a very large farm. So I don't know if there's been a change in time. Does anybody else on the call know? Nope. Okay. All right. I'm going to ask you this last question before we close out, and then invite you to verbalize any questions you might have that I didn't answer. My question is, what climate solutions would you like to know more about? So, and then go ahead and think about it, type your answer in, and in about 30 seconds, we'll hit enter. In the meantime, how do you see industrial commercial pressures being balanced with low intensity local interests? Is that a question in terms of agriculture or more broadly? Okay. I see a lot of movement in terms of younger people being interested in local agriculture, regenerative agriculture, different ways of doing things, and being really smart about it and getting, USDA grants, figuring out how to make it a nonprofit, doing sort of creative solutions. I see that there are some really great stories of kind of the new generation, younger people, younger than me, doing new creative things. And so that's really fun to watch. A recent speaker discussed the change of crop to hemp and how it might make a difference in water use. Yes, I know that has happened quite a lot, especially in southeastern Colorado. There's a huge area of folks that are moving to hemp production. That could be a big challenge in terms of water use, but the crops that were grown in that area before were pretty highly water demanding crops, melons. And so the big thing I think the big challenge would be the salinity. They already have salinity issues in that area. And so using a lot of water with a lot of more evaporation could be more salinity challenge. Okay, and so go ahead and hit enter for things that you might like to know more about. Interested in agroecology, or, okay, I'm gonna scroll back up. They're all coming in so fast. All right, regenerative agriculture, excellent. Public acceptance of solutions to climate change, that's a huge, huge area, and one we're working a lot on. We're branching into other terms of communication or other ways of communication. Want to be connected to all your resources. My resources?
The Climate Hub's resources.
Okay, well, let me I'm gonna share my screen one last time so I can share a few of those. But I want to see these answers first. So policy solutions. Yeah, that's a great question. It's interesting as a scientist in USDA, I'm not allowed to talk about policy, only science, and that's an interesting divide. Air pollution, transportation, fossil fuel use, wars, carbon removal from the atmosphere, excellent, and water importation. Wow, creative solutions and ideas coming up here. All right, my final slide then shares a few more of our resources. So there's our website where you can find information from me and our team of now about 13 folks. If you're interested in getting a quarterly e-bulletin, this is where you need to go for that. We launched a monthly podcast earlier this year, and if you have ideas of folks that you think you'd like to hear from, let me know. It's really fun. So if you're interested, it's rainorshine@buzzsprout.com. And we're also part of a very large sustainable Southwest beef project. So if you're interested in that, that's there. I can piece these into the chat. I know we're a minute over, so I'm going to stop sharing and stop talking, and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Emily. It was fascinating. The links that you put into chat would be very interesting. Would you be willing to share your slides with us? Our peers at UNM have this very efficient operation of posting the recordings and the slide deck. So Emily, you and I can coordinate offline on that, and then we can make those available. But with that, I just invite our audience to either take advantage of the reactions tool to let Emily know what we think of her project, or we can give the ever-present thumbs up. But I just want to thank you very much, Emily. This was wonderful. I wish the drought wasn't so severe in our particular region to make it so relevant, but thank you, Emily. Be well.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for the invitation. Feel free to email me if you have more questions.
Great participation, everyone, and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you, Mindy.
Thank you, Chris.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.